The views and opinions expressed on Beautiful Disasters are those of the panelists and not those of the Geeks Under the Influence Network, their sponsors, or anyone else involved. Also, there is going to be a lot of adult language used on this podcast, so please keep your little kitties away unless you don't care about them that much.
Hi friends, welcome to another episode of Beautiful Disasters. I am joined by my handsome co-host, the Grutz.
Yes, indeed.
And I am, of course, Murphy, whether you like it or not. And tonight, we are going to do a little something new, because we thought we would get a little nasty with you.
I love it.
Yeah, well, big shock. You love getting nasty.
Indeed.
And we're not saying that just to get a rise out of you. We are going to be talking about the video nasties, which is a term that's UK-based in origin. And while it is something that primarily affected how films were created and distributed and seen across the UK via, the VHS boom, it has echoes across the world, has echoes in the United States, and it's something that, like, as people that love weird, shocking, exploitive, and everything in between cinema, it's something that I feel like we should take into account because, if anything, the video nasty cycle, the MPAA, and things like that will show us that time and time again, people will try to stop people from making different kinds of art if they don't fit their criteria of wholesomeness.
You are absolutely correct. And this term obviously was really popular in the 80s. This is when it came about.
Yep.
However, I want to backtrack just a little bit because I want to give a little history of how this series, which is going to be a series,
yes, it is,
became a thing. When I asked you if you would be so kind as to join Beautiful Disasters,
which I'm still flattered and shocked about, if I'm being completely honest.
Which made so much sense to everybody, But in any case, we started talking about, new ideas, and this was something that you came up with and threw off the top of your head, and it is such a fucking good idea.
Yeah.
And I guess just to, before we get into the nitty-gritty and the history of the video nasties, I guess let's talk a little bit about what this series is going to entail, what we're going to be doing over the next several episodes.
Several episodes is definitely an understatement, as we've got, at a minimum somewhere around like 80 films to discuss.
Yes.
At minimum, and that's if we don't stretch it to some of the others that were not prosecuted but were definitely cut and otherwise restricted by this movement. So basically, what we're going to be doing is going through segments of the films that were either prosecuted successfully as a result of the Video Recordings Act of 1984 in Britain, requiring a new certification of video releases by the BBFC, or the lesser amount that was not prosecuted or otherwise unsuccessfully prosecuted. And we're going to try to balance those two out. So each time we record, we're going to try to do one that was successfully prosecuted, what we feel, its relevance to cinema were, and likewise one that was unsuccessfully prosecuted, for as long as we can parallel those. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys, there are 4 films that involve Nazi exploitation on this list. We are going to do those films in episodes, because each episode is going to have 2 films, and we're going to do those films together. So that way, if for some reason, if that's just your line and you don't want to hear us talk about those films, you can just skip that episode as a whole. But
there's so much problematic shit in these movies. Yeah. I mean, okay, so we're talking about the video nasties, and before we get into like really the nitty gritty of what they were and the history behind it, they were basically censored films. This push came out of Britain. It was movies that were so obscene that they had to be censored.
Right.
Right? And this...
Well, initially, but, at a certain point, they also just started grabbing, films off the shelves that looked like they could be lascivious.
I know. We're going to get into that.
I know.
We're going to get into that.
I just feel like it's worth mentioning.
No, we're going to mention that. But I just want to say, very briefly, the Video Nasties were basically a list of censored films. There were 72 films that were in the initial list, and there was a tertiary list later. As you mentioned earlier, there was a prosecuted list and a non-prosecuted list, and we're going to get into the details of those. But for the most part, what we're going to be doing on this series is going through the whole list of the 72, going over 2 different movies each episode. So we've got at least 36 episodes, and if it's really popular, maybe we'll do the third list. Who knows?
Yeah,
but it's
we'll probably watch those anyway. So
but we're going through basically the notorious 80s censored genre movies. It's mostly horror,
some exploitation,
some definitely exploitation. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, as you mentioned already, there is some Nazi exploitation. There's a whole lot of revenge films, rape revenge films.
Animal attack films is another huge subgenre.
There's cannibalism. There's all kinds of stuff. These are the grossest of the gross. These are the ones that everybody in polite society was like, oh, this can't be art.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the other categories, was things deemed an odd artistic effort, which is, I think, a big part of what specifically struck me as something that, I know that other people have talked about this before, but, what struck me as something that was so appropriate for Beautiful Disasters in particular, because, there's such a wide variety of film out there, and the freedom to make that film is very important to me. And not everybody's going to go see every kind of film. I'm not going to like every single film. It'd be kind of weird if I did, and at that point,
No, there are a million podcasts out there. There's a million film critics, essayists, people writing books about all kinds of film. We just happen to be doing the ones that are more genre related because that's our jam here.
Heck yeah!
I love a Kurosawa film. I love a lot of different kinds of cinema. We just happen to be on this series, BD Gets Nasty. We are going to go into the Video Nasties. We are going to go through all the movies that made a bunch of British people super stuck up.
We're just going to give the biggest middle finger we can to Mary Whitehouse, who is the person who led the campaign to, get the Video Nasty craze going that would lead to that, Recordings Act, which was in a sense a refinement of the Obscene Publications Act of 1959, which was then amended in 1977 to cover erotic films.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
I know. I'm just saying that this is all
so
her push.
Yes, she was an uber cunt, and I don't mean that in any kind of a gendered way. I mean it in the British way.
It's just a delightful word. It's actually my favorite swear word.
It is. Yes, it is best used by the Brits. Which a lot of this information, a lot of this history is coming out of Britain. Yeah. She was like the UK Tipper Gore.
Oh, God, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Jesus.
But, absolutely, let's get into the history.
Yes, let's dig in a little.
So, why don't you begin? give us a start point so we can kind of get into what the Video Nasties were, where it came out. You mentioned 1959 as a starting point.
Okay, so 1959 is when their Obscene Publications Act came into play, and that was for cinema, and I also believe for book releases and things like that as well. And it was amended in 1977 to cover erotic films because, God forbid, we acknowledge that each other get naked and have desire.
Right.
That's too much. But because of when those laws came into effect, there was nothing covering home video release. So there was nothing that, would restrict that market. And obviously they weren't predicting the boom of VHS and the freedom that would come with it for people to copy and to share and to make their own films more readily.
Right. This was the loophole that led to the Video Nasties, because the British Board of Film Classification, the BBFC, in the early 80s, exactly that. The video revolution led to that, and that's immediately resulted in uber cunt Mary Whitehouse forming the NVLA was with the National Viewers and Listeners Association Censor Group.
That's right. And the term nasty being used to describe horror fiction started in British publishing for paperback originals like 1974 James Herbert's The Rats and the like Night of the Crabs and Slugs, and a lot of it just related to the animal attack subgenre and the mimicking of 50s monster movies. But it wasn't just horror novel related where they started curtailing these films, these novels, excuse me, because we're still talking about the use of the word nasty and to refer to published material. So there was also like the Leone-influenced westerns, the juvenile delinquency novels, the war stories. All of these were things that tended to contain sex scenes, right. And so it's often coming back to those links of sex and violence. The things that drive a lot of the basis of honestly many genres of film and book and all sorts of things, just how it is utilized as part of the discussion and to what major extent it occurs.
It's going to be really interesting in the future as we go through this series to talk about exactly how much the levels of violence versus sexuality are really balanced out, because some films, the way they were put on the list as far as censored, were totally skewed as to other ones. And I think it's worth mentioning, as you were saying, like throughout this history, where all this stuff came from, video box art really spurned this whole thing. And there was a freedom with box art that didn't come with this. That movie posters were regulated.
Right, they were. As part of the releases, they had to be approved. But box art, especially if you were putting out your own movies, you could go ham. And you wanted something that would get people to grab that movie and have to find out. At lascivious advertising at its finest. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying that in the, like, ooh, let me touch this, sort of way.
Well, no, I mean, honestly, like, I still remember growing up. I'm just old enough to remember going to video stores as a young person and being absolutely flabbergasted by the amazing, like, video box art that you could see. And there actually was a committee put together called the Video Packaging Review Committee, the VPRC, which was arranged because it wasn't regulated. And this kind of like fed into the NVLA and the BBFC, and everything all kind of came together. With Mary Whitehouse, right?
Yeah, and this is something that I especially find interesting because we mentioned those cycles earlier, and when we're talking about like the Hays Code in relevance to American films and American cinema, that was something that we saw come into curtail, the violence and the intensity and what could and couldn't be portrayed as far as homosexuality, and where I do think that the Hays Code was obviously much more extreme in its cutbacks of what could and couldn't be. I definitely continue to see these cycles of repression paralleled throughout, in a narrow UK-centric worldview, because other countries treat things very differently. But
we also have to take into account the era that this came out. This was the Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan era. Where this was all happening, where it was a big return to family values and conservatism.
Reagan as the person that brought evangelicalism into the White House and all sorts of other things like that.
And this was the same thing happening over here. And this woman who felt like this was totally inappropriate in every way was a crusader. Like
she was.
Like, absolutely, 100%. And the Video Nasties list and designation was really kind of born. I mean, that was coined by the media, the term, but you mentioned the Obscene Publications Act of 1959 as being like the genesis of this.
Yeah, this is where we first see that come into action. But that Video Recordings Act of 1984 is where everything, became that full catalyst, where they began requiring certification of video releases by the BBFC, and there was a stricter code of censorship for these home videos than there was on the cinema release, which I find really interesting because it was basically the opposite of what it was like here. because, you know, you can see so much more on home video or, you know, take-home things than you can see in a cinema. I find that really fascinating. And films submitted before that date had to be resubmitted within the following 3 years. Otherwise, you know, there could be fines, there could be jail time, there could be all sorts of things, or they could just simply ban your video and refuse to release it.
Or they could come into your store, and if you were in violation, they could...
They can raid you.
They could raid you. They could take all your stuff and burn it on a fire, basically, you know, and shut you the hell down, like put you out of business.
Never mind if it was your life's work, your way of supporting your family. These brutal raids, they would come in, and you could choose to basically, you know, save yourself from punishment by just outright admitting, like, oh, yes, I was in possession of obscene materials, or I've been essentially peddling obscene materials, which is, you know, one of those things that, you know, it's like, you can just confess, and and then it'll be easier on you, which is, just so gross.
You mentioned, Video Recordings Act, 1984. So we ended up with 2 lists. We had a list of prosecuted films. That was 39 long.
Yep, that were prosecuted successfully.
And then the non-prosecuted films, which, if you still had them in your store, you could still
be fined or still be dealt with as like jail time, things like that.
You could be fined. You could be they would be confiscated. They could be destroyed. You could be shut down. But you might not
declared obscene.
You might not be prosecuted for prison time.
Right. It might not be to as great a level. And that was the list of 33 that were either not prosecuted or were unsuccessfully prosecuted.
Correct.
And like the big push was the UK system of rating things is a lot more varied than ours, where, you know, in this time, you know, we didn't even have, I think the PG-13 rating was just starting to make its...
It hadn't happened yet.
Yeah, like it was becoming talked about.
It was
here.
About to be, yeah.
Yeah, and so this is where we have G, we have PG, we've got R, we've got NC-17, we've got X. No, we didn't have NC-17 yet.
Correct.
That's right, we had R and then we had X. And they divide things up a lot more between like 12, 15, 18, and they've got 12A, which is like 12 with an adult and things like that.
Yeah.
So this was to try to curtail the supply and how widespread it would be and how easy it would be to see the videos marked for 15 or 18 release. And so it became a criminal offense to supply these to underage peoples. And even to the point, you know, once the era of the internet came around, where screenshotting and pictures and things like that became more prevalent, you know, there's became other discussions centered on, well, you know, is it okay? It's okay to see the film, but you still can't be in possession of these screenshots from the film. And so it became even more divided down of like, you know, scrutiny of consuming what was considered these obscene materials.
One of the little tidbits from this era regarding these films is that because each store had all these videos and there could be different kinds of releases, there could be different art, they paid people, the British government paid cops to watch these videos all the way through. And all I can think is that of all the shitty stuff you could do as a cop, can you imagine having the job to just watch a bunch of genre movies? That would be my perfect... I would actually be a cop if that was my job.
Yeah, but then you would either have to lie and be like, no, this is fine. Or then you would have to be the guy that shuts down the thing that he loves or curtails the availability of the thing that he loves.
Well,
which I kind of suspect.
I might throw the shitty movies under the bus, like Faces of Death, but like...
Yeah.
The other ones, I mean, that's not culturally relevant.
But we're still going to watch Faces of Death.
Great.
Yeah, we are. Oh, yeah, we are.
Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, we've actually seen a great number of these movies we've already seen, which is amazing.
Yeah, I'd seen more of them than I thought I would have when I first heard about this list, because I definitely thought that they were going to be like these, you know, insane, super niche films. And I guess, like, you know, if you don't seek out a ton of horror, then they might feel that way. But I do hope that somebody goes out and picks up at least one of the films off this list from hearing us talk.
Oh, yeah.
That would definitely make my day.
Obviously, there's a bunch of movies on this list that like people will recognize easily.
I would be really shocked because we are, like I said, we're going to talk about 2 each episode, and we are going to do the same for this episode. We just wanted to give you a sort of overview of what we are discussing and what this era was about and why it's still important to remember that this happened and talk about what these films were. So definitely. I would be shocked if you weren't super aware of at least one of the films that we talked about today.
I would say something to mention before we do end up moving on is the Daily Mail. One of the big news outlets in the UK was a big element in like sort of making this whole situation way more blown out of proportion and really
distributing the panic and the anxiety,
accelerating. Yes,
they were the 2020 of their time.
There was a big hand in making this the big scandal of the time.
Yes,
because it was big news.
Yeah.
And they did everything they could. You know, they had reporters really go to town in a very unethical way against a lot of these video stores, these filmmakers, these films themselves. I got to say the Daily Mail did a lot for their ratings to make this a big issue when it really...
I definitely remember reading about that as well. And even right before we recorded this, we found on YouTube an old video of Siskel and Ebert talking about the video nasties. And it felt very similar to that, where they were talking about, like, go into your video stores and look in the horror section and see if there's one marked video nasties. Their kids are having these video nasties parties, and, do you want your children viewing this? And it's a, who can watch the whole thing and who can't? And I was just like, and I know that there is somebody out there that's doing this, but no.
We talked about this. That was a cheap shot.
Yeah.
I honestly think
it was such a shitty thing to do against smaller video stores.
Right. This panic was happening so hardcore over in Britain. And I felt like, Siskel and Ebert were early on in their television career at this point. This is the early to mid 80s or mid 80s, and they were just like, we got to jump on this now because this is big news and this is going to be ratings. They did.
It just feels like the video satanic panic, It's, one thing happens and they're just like, oh, it's everywhere. No, it is not. And there's a select amount of people that are interested in it, but I don't know, maybe go to the video store with your kid. There's
that. And also, I want to say it wasn't everybody over in Britain, obviously.
Who gives a fuck about the kids?
All the punk rockers didn't give a fuck. But I want to say that there was a little ray of light because there was an episode of The Young Ones, which is one of my favorite shows from over in Britain. Brilliant, funny sitcom satire, and they had a whole show about the video nasties, poking fun at it.
Oh yeah,
really, really good.
That was mentioned in the Severin documentary because Severin has a really great documentary that's available through their website. They've actually got 2 DVDs.
2 parts. Yeah, 2 parts. 4 discs. There's a lot of content.
Yeah. And they include all the trailers and things for them, so you can kind of get a taste for each one. But yeah, it's the Video Nasties, the definitive guide. So I just wanted to mention that as well because a lot of good information there.
Yeah, their 2-part documentary is really good. They also happen to have released. I want to say their catalog probably has 20 of the video nasties.
Yeah. I know that
they have a good amount of them in their actual catalog.
Which I love. I actually just ordered a couple of them through their most recent sale, so I've got stuff like Cannibal Man and sadly I didn't grab Anthropophagus, but got some coming this way. The House on the Edge of the Park. Sort of stuff. But David Gregory is a huge proponent of distributing them, and I love that. Apparently only 10 films still remained banned, which we can talk about at a later date.
Oh, I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, last I looked, there are apparently 10 films that are still banned.
Oh, I'm super excited to hear about those. We can do that later.
Yeah, we can talk about those later.
I want to mention one quick thing. Something about the fact that there were certain films that were put up to be in the list and banned, on such little evidence. Their title alone. And one of the famous ones was Best Little Horror House in Texas.
Yes, I remember
which is so fucking funny because... there really isn't anything in that movie that's on any level of these other 72 films, like, not even close.
Absolutely not.
But it was just the title alone. Yeah. They were just like, oh, it must be blah, 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 blah.
That sounds filthy. Let's take it.
So, what else you got for background?
I mean, I think we've covered a big portion of what, we wanted to just get out there about what the video nasties were and why we're talking about them. And I do, to be fair to, at the very least, Ebert, I know that he has come a long way in, examining the way that he discussed films in the past. So, like, I'm not totally condemning them. They definitely played a large role in continuing the problematic nature of discussing films like this and for getting smaller budget things shut down if they didn't like them because they were so powerful. And it's something that we have to acknowledge as people that are interested in genre films and horror films and things that, like, while they are seeing a renaissance now, it's definitely been, it is an other genre. And to discuss also within, like, Grindhouse and other stuff within those categories that may fall along the lines, the outlaw biker stories, and even some war stories. Like, the one of the things that I did come across was that the juxtaposition between what happens, even including in one of the films we're going to discuss today, and something like Apocalypse Now, very similar acts take place, but they are treated so differently because of what they are as a basis for a film.
100%. And yes, at the time, Siskel and Ebert were absolutely capitalizing on the fervor of the movement. And they were doing it for ratings, and we get it. And, obviously, like, traditionally they didn't like genre movies that much. They, to Ebert's credit, he actually backtracked on a few movies over his career. But whatever, they're dead now. So
well, I just wanted to put that out there as, like, an in fairness note, just to know, like, to let people know that, like, we're not only condemning people based off of something that happened back in the 80s, because that is the other part of what I think, needs to happen, is that people who may form an initial opinion of these films, or may even have had an opinion of the films based off of the cover, should have the ability and time to reflect and change and update their viewpoints.
Right. We're not trying to be the other end of the spectrum from Mary Whitehouse.
Right. No.
Okay. We're not driving a hard line like,
good Lord,
fuck these cunts and all their their brethren or whatever.
That's right. But we discuss their political leanings because it is a fact. It is something that, like, at times is inherent in the discussion of film.
Right. That was the era, etc. And as this series goes along, we will have more tidbits and more. We will no doubt dig out more little information here and there about the history of the video nasties. But for the most part, we really wanted to go over the main history of it in this first intro episode, so that you would have a basis for understanding what we're talking about. Right. And we'll have a little recap at the beginning of subsequent episodes so everybody understands what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I will try to do my best to put maybe even, like, a little note in, like, the postings about subsequent episodes, like, hey, if you don't know what the video nasties were and just want to listen to the episode, hop back to this one, and that sort of thing.
Word.
So
that sounds perfect.
But I think that it's probably a great time to dig into our two examples for today to get this shit rolling.
Yes.
I'm ready to get nasty.
So yes. So we have two films, and I believe you have the first film.
I do have the first film, if you're comfortable listening to me talk for umpteenth more minutes.
Both of the films we're going to talk about, we chose them specifically because they are very known to most people. So, like,
at the very least, the names are known.
Yes, the names are known. Many people that enjoy genre cinema who might be listening to this podcast maybe have seen these movies, or at least know about them. So we're going to talk about these ones today, and then we're going to get to some weird, obscure shit, like, in later episodes, but...
Yeah, so today, my film for today is Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. Grutz, what is your film for today?
Yes, Evil Dead!
Nice. Yeah, the original.
The original. Yeah, of course. Right. The original. Sam Raimi directed Evil Dead. Fucking amazing.
That's right. 2 films that were honestly revolutionary in their own right. Regardless of how you feel about them as films, you cannot deny that each of these films made aggressive and important contributions to the way that films have been shot since then. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I have not found a stronger contestant between, from Cannibal Holocaust that would have been the basis for the found footage genre. A lot of people attribute it to, it's been attributed to The Last Broadcast, it's been attributed to The Blair Witch, and it's been attributed to Ghost Watch. But Cannibal Holocaust precedes all of those, and the only films that, as far as I know, again, I'm not an infallible being, but the only things that preceded that were the Mondo films, the Mondo documentaries, which were also used as, but those are a whole other thing.
Those aren't narrative films.
They're not. So, but I'm just saying that, including them in that discussion, because the Mondo films were part of the inspiration for how Cannibal Holocaust is put together.
Absolutely.
So that's part of why I wanted to mention
Ruggero
that.
Deodato has said as much
Yes.
in the past, but you're right.
Mm-hmm.
He did a thing with this movie that really hadn't been done in any grand scale, and he did it to such his vision of the marketing of this movie was fucking brilliant.
Yeah. Oh man.
Because he you talk about it.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, you want to talk about a marketing scheme that worked too well? Look at the marketing for Cannibal Holocaust.
He's going to jail.
Almost prosecuted for murder. Had to produce his actors and prove that it wasn't a snuff film. Just to give you a brief overview of what had to be cut from Cannibal Holocaust, it was finally released in the UK in 2001 with 5 minutes 44 seconds cut to remove the animal cruelty scenes and the rape scenes. It was re-released in 2011 with only 15 seconds cut to one of the animal cruelty scenes, which I believe was the Coatimundi. Which, we will get into what all of that entails, as we're discussing this film, but that is what had to be cut ultimately 20 fucking years after the film's initial release for it to be seen in the UK, which is just astounding. And, this is a film that purports itself to, as part of its fame, to have been banned in 50 countries. And, I do believe that.
Oh, yeah.
And I won't lie to you. Cannibal Holocaust is an intense film to watch, to put it as mildly as possible. And the scenes of animal cruelty in it, they're real, which I do not endorse. And there are ways to select on the the Grindhouse releasing DVD I have of it. There is a cruelty-free version that you can watch, that sort of thing. And I think that there's also, I read somewhere that there's also a one with the sex scenes cut for Muslim countries because of the nudity.
Yeah, I think something. My copy's from Sweden, so it's there's nothing cut.
Yeah, no, the version that I watched was completely uncut, and and I as tough as those scenes are to watch, I wanted it that way. And the crazy thing, and I'm definitely not saying to do this in your movie, but part of what I think made it even more intense for Cannibal Holocaust is once you see those scenes of once you see an animal die in the film and you realize it's real, the stakes feel different watching it. And it added another layer to the blurring of the lines for the found footage aspect of Cannibal Holocaust, which, again, led to it being discussed of whether or not it was a snuff film.
I mean, I think that was probably one of the chief movies that qualified for the Video Nasties.
Yes.
100%.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you're right, because it was, when it was made, there had been a couple cannibal films before that, but this was the one that really sparked the genre. And
this was definitely one of the crown jewels of specifically the Italian cannibal genre.
It was. 100%. And it went to such lengths, and Deodato, what he did for the movie, every choice he made, whether it was the found footage style, the afterwards going back for a second, to go find the missing folks, his choices on the score, his unflinching, sort of depiction of tribalistic violence, hiring locals, hiring, people from the Amazon.
The Colombian indigenous tribes that were cast.
And there was a lot done in this movie.
And he cast primarily Italian and American unknowns as the actors.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't even like... And this is all, again, before the time of the internet. There was no way to easily research who a face on screen was. You just had to know them. And so that all led to these like blurring of those lines. And again, if you look into the details of the filming of Cannibal Holocaust, there's a lot there, and it was definitely a traumatic shoot for many people involved.
Sure.
But it is something that without Cannibal Holocaust, we wouldn't have, I feel personally, that we wouldn't have found footage the way that we know it. I know that at the very least, like, I don't know that Blair Witch ever vocally recognized them as, an influence, but I know that the director of Wreck did. And it's something that, like, even amongst all of this violence, like, we're talking about the violent aspects of this story, but it was being used as a way to discuss the Italian media coverage of, like, the Red Bridges terrorism and the focus on portraying violence with little regard to journalistic integrity. And Deodato really wanted to discuss, those ethics in journalism, the exploitation of South American countries, and a whole bunch of things surrounding that.
Yeah, but he also wanted to make that movie.
He also wanted to make the movie. Like, I'm not saying, and it was made within the boundaries of an Italian cannibal film. So it is a very mixed bag of things, but it is one of the things that I appreciated is them going back and discovering that what the people thought they were going to find with this indigenous culture wasn't true. And that it was being provoked by the people that were going there to make a documentary, and that the people going there to make this documentary that disappeared were trying to start a war between, groups of people, and were doing so by setting fire to villages, by raping natives, by killing their animals, all sorts of things.
I'm really curious to know, or to ascertain at some point how much of that was intentionally conceived of before the movie.
There's a good chunk of it that
was after, because there's something to be said about the fact that it got so much notoriety and so much fanfare that there was a lot of stuff that was said and stated after the fact.
Yeah.
And
Deodato himself has revisited the way that he discusses this film.
He has,
and the things that he would do differently. But, one of the big things that, I definitely wanted to point out that I brought up earlier in this episode is that the big thing that had to be cut from Cannibal Holocaust, is the animal cruelty, like the on-screen animal death, which is the thing that was included in Apocalypse Now that wasn't even given a second glance.
Right.
And that disparity is something that, I think we see a lot.
Well,
and I'm not saying that we should be able to kill animals. I'm not purporting that.
I totally get it.
So don't get that twisted. I'm just saying that, like, it is something that I consider very telling for what their purposes were.
The difference is, and this has been long-standing, with genre film, especially horror film, anything that touches horror in any way, shape, or form, it's seen as lesser class cinema.
Right.
And when you have Francis Ford Coppola making his epic, psychological war film, Apocalypse Now, his epic, that's not going to be treated the same way in the eyes of the censors or critics. That's just not how it is.
And I'm just saying that, like, animal death is animal death. And it should be.
And the 70s were a different time, and there are much more controls in place now.
Yes.
However, I will agree with you 100% on one thing, is that the marketing of this movie was way ahead of its time. And it is, when it comes to the Blair Witch Project, that was the first time subsequently that the marketing worked as well in the same fashion. Because
I would also put Ghost Watch in there as well. Ghost Watch is it was an episode aired by one of the channels of the BBC where it mixed actors and actual presenters.
When did this happen?
This was, I want to say early 90s. I will have to double check that date.
This is a deep cut that nobody knows about.
Okay.
So I agree with you. I will agree with you.
Let me pull up that date real
100%.
quick.
But what I'm saying is on the same
92.
On the same scale.
But so it's a deep cut here, but I feel like, in relevance to what we're discussing, it was something that, like, so they were investigating this haunting where they had 2 actual presenters, one in the studio and one on site, people that were known as reporters, that were, children's TV presenters or like your daytime TV presenter, that sort of thing. And then, you had like these, quote unquote experts and these actors and like this play of whether it was an actual haunting or whether it wasn't, and there was the fake out, and then it was, it being real and the haunting moving to the studio and that sort of thing. And they aired it, and while they did deliver a notification like this is a presentation by the BBC, where obviously if you tuned into the beginning of it, it was going to be fake. The same way that if you analyze, hey, maybe if they're releasing this, found footage of these friends that disappeared in the woods in a cinema, you would be like, well, that seems kind of sketch if this is a real thing. Yeah. But it's the same thing that happened when people tuned in the middle of War of the Worlds.
I was about to say the same thing. I feel like that's a better...
And they were very much,
I feel like that is a perfect comparison to this episode of TV you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I'm
just saying that all of that is you have to acknowledge the marketing that goes into all of these and look at Cannibal Holocaust as well.
I would say there's something different between a live broadcast or a live radio show.
Well, they also had people calling in and treating it,
But that was the time. That was at the time. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that
I think it's available.
This was a film
distribution now,
as was Blair Witch.
Right.
That was designed to be the way it was, and there was intentional marketing that was done with planning and execution over time.
Yep.
There were trailers, there were all kinds of things that came out. And
Blair Witch was able to use the internet to its advantage because it was in the early sketchy days, so you just went to that website.
Now, obviously, we were far enough along with the internet and everything that like they weren't going to get prosecuted for anything because they weren't fooling anybody behind the scenes, but the marketing campaign was so well done. I think it's honestly the closest thing that we've ever had to Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah, no,
publicly
I do
and
agree.
like as far as media like coverage and everything,
Is it real? Isn't it? People sort of wanting it to be real. Like I think some people really wanted Blair Witch to be real.
Yeah.
Because the mythology of that is so tantalizing. I don't necessarily think that anyone wanted Cannibal Holocaust to be real because that's okay, so somebody out there is probably like, fuck yeah, this is real, bro. But, it's...
Well, Blair Witch is still one of the most profitable movies ever made, so...
It is. Yeah. And, the found footage genre continues to be a smart, budget-effective way to make cinema. I mean, you can also look at things like Paranormal Activity and Wreck and Quarantine and a whole bunch of other things. The Hell House LLC, all sorts of things that came after this point of Cannibal Holocaust. And I'm just saying that it is an intense watch, but I feel that it is worth a watch.
It is.
And
definitely.
Again, you can find like if you do not want to see those scenes,
animals being killed and eaten.
Yes, they were eaten. They weren't just like left out there and senseless.
No, it wasn't. They weren't just tortured and left.
Right, and they were all like quick, clean deaths, and they were eaten. But if that is something that is too much for you, but that you want to check out this film, there are versions out there that you can see. I encourage you to see things in their uncut versions because I think it is best to see things as the director intended them to be seen.
I agree.
But that is me, and I will not make that choice for you or ridicule you for your choices.
That is the opinion of how to watch it. However, you don't need to watch any movie you don't want to watch.
It doesn't make you lesser.
And let's just say that there are a lot of people that were way more mad at the animal deaths in the movie than the horrific, brutal killings or rape in
rape
the movie.
Scenes, the treatment of human beings and things like that.
Fuck.
It's fine. And just to give you your extra nerd tidbit, the name of the documentary within Cannibal Holocaust, that is the found footage aspect of it, was going to be called The Green Inferno, which is where Eli Roth got the name for his. We'll call it an homage to Cannibal Holocaust, but
it's a thing.
I also feel like, without Cannibal Holocaust, we don't get Eli Roth, at least not to the extent we have him now.
Oh.
I know.
Man,
Look, everybody's got different feelings, and it's something to acknowledge that, like, whether or not something is my jam.
He hosts a good horror show.
He does. I love him as a horror historian. He is an amazing horror historian. But, just because it's not my jam doesn't mean that I don't love seeing those connections. And likewise, the film that you are going to discuss is also responsible for some innovative camera work and some
big time
echoes. So lead us down the pathway to that first cabin in the woods.
Oh my goodness gracious. Well,
Tell us about the Evil Dead.
What can I tell you about Sam Raimi's Evil Dead that you don't already know? Because it is one of the most famous, like, indie horror films ever made. Only a couple years after John Carpenter's Halloween, and a bunch of buddies from college decided to get together and make a movie in the fucking woods with a cabin and a shitty car. And man, did they I think they got their loans from a couple dentists or some shit.
Yeah.
In any case, Sam Raimi, famously cast Bruce Campbell in the lead role. Bunch of college kids going to a cabin in the woods and discovering some unspeakable evil from a Book of the Dead. We're talking about Evil Dead, and as far as its entrance into the Video Nasties list, it was on the non-prosecuted side. It was banned for violent content. They only cut out 49 seconds of the movie.
Was it the tree rape scene?
No.
What?
No. It was 49 seconds from axe blows, there was an eye gouge, and a pencil stabbed in the leg. Surprisingly, the tree rape scene was not an issue.
Again, this is remarkable. That
makes no sense.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Because the tree rape scene is the most disturbing
it is
entire sequence of that film.
It is definitely skin crawling, and while you can place that hopefully firmly in the world of fantasy, is still something that makes you maybe take another look when you go on those hikes.
That's definitely, like, if I was a shitty censor, some conservative shitty censor from the 80s, that would be the thing I would drill down on.
Right.
Okay. If I was that person, I would be like, axe blows, eyes gouge, that's all gross and all.
My God, but they're fucking everything.
But goddamn, a damn branch went up that coochie. Fuck. That's hardcore. Like, that's terrible.
Yeah.
In any case, what do I need to say about the movie? It was
talk about it like as if I hadn't seen it. Tell me about the Evil Dead like I've never seen Evil Dead.
Well, I mean, it's a brilliant. It is a quintessential use of a limited budget to make a passion project movie, which was a horror movie in the woods. Unspeakable evil gets awakened. People have to deal with it. Everyone ends up basically dying. Your protagonist ends up having to kill his girlfriend after she turns. It's amazing. I almost, like, as much as I love this movie, I really have to say I love Evil Dead 2 more, because it's really kind of a remake of the movie with a little bit more budget, and it's funnier.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's Evil Dead.
Yeah. No, it's
we all know
quintessential horror viewing. It is definitely something that I would place high on the list of if you are starting to explore the horror genre. Evil Dead is definitely one that you should check out. For the do-it-yourself attitude, for the shaky cam. Like all sorts of things that they did in that.
Sam Raimi,
the atmosphere.
There's a reason he has an amazing career, is because he was an innovator in his own way. I mean, he still makes huge movies.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, like, the most recent Marvel thing that he did was such an homage to Evil Dead and his old movies. Like, I fucking loved it. But that was the only reason I liked it. To be honest, like, it was just like the fast zooms and the crazy, like, sequences. The film is amazing. Now, would I have ever thought that it would be, censored for a video nasty? Like, it doesn't really feel. It's not on the same level as Cannibal Holocaust in any way, shape, or form. As far as brutality, as far as, like, grossness, as far as explicit sexual violation, animals dying on screen, like,
right. But we're talking about the width and breadth of what was attempted to be prosecuted, and was Evil Dead ever banned for a while, like, or was it just that they weren't able to prosecute, and so they said, all right, make these cuts and we'll release it? Or was there a later date?
It was finally released in the UK in 1990.
Okay.
About a decade later. So
that's still a huge chunk of time.
It is. And it is. But I mean, it still boggles my mind because the thing that they weren't judging it on is the one thing that I would have thought that they would have actually banned it for.
Literally my first question to you.
Yeah. It's like, a giant branch vaginally penetrating,
invading a human body in what is considered the most intimate of ways.
Yeah. And no, that wasn't the thing. But suffice to say, it's a very recognizable movie that did make this list. And I would definitely say that in future episodes, there's going to be a lot of more obscure titles.
Yeah.
Obviously, that we're going to be talking about here and there. But there's definitely going to be stuff that are going to be as recognizable as Cannibal, Holocaust, and Evil Dead.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There will be things on both sides of that fence. Mm-hmm. And, it is exciting that a lot of these are more readily available, at the very least in the U.S., some are available on streaming services now, which is, wild to think about that we went from this total ban to streaming. And that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I want to say,
I think eventually we'll get into.
The last time I looked, this was a couple weeks back, but I want to say Shudder has almost more than a quarter of these movies.
Yeah, they've got a huge chunk. Cannibal Holocaust should still be on there, actually.
Yeah.
Which I don't believe is I believe it's the uncut version.
I think they might even have 2 ways to watch it.
Oh, okay.
That's possible.
Cool.
I can't remember. Or maybe they were just talking about that on the Joe Bob episode. I can't remember. But there are a lot of these films on Shudder, and the ones you can't find, I'm sure you can find elsewhere. If not, there are ways. There's always ways.
That's true. And if you guys enjoy this episode, then maybe what we might start doing is letting you guys even vote on the next ones that we're going to watch.
Ooh.
Give you a handful that we've got easy access to for each category, and then pick that combo. And Grutz and I are going to switch off of who's talking about the prosecuted side, who's talking about unprosecuted. But like I said, the plan is for us both. I think you've seen pretty much all of these.
I've seen a good amount. I did an inventory recently, and there's only 8 that I don't have.
That you don't own, or that you haven't seen?
That I don't own.
Okay. Nice.
There are some in this list that I own, but I have not seen yet.
Okay, so
just because I don't have
that as we go.
as much time as I want.
Legit. Would that we could just have it be our full-time gig to watch films, discuss them, and show them to the masses for joy, entertainment, and
we need to figure out how to make B-movie content like podcasting, like a Twitch streaming sort of revenue thing.
Yeah, we can work on that. Look, I'm down to figure this out. So if
there's motherfuckers out there making 6 figures and just playing video games and talking about
look, man, I'd be happy to make $5. So show Murphy a little love.
Word.
Show us that monetary love. And I think that just about wraps it up for us. Unless do you have any closing notes that you want to say about the video Nasties, Evil Dead, or the things that you're really hoping to get into throughout the course of this series?
All I can say is that I'm super excited. I love this idea. I loved it as soon as you mentioned it, as the words were coming out of your mouth. Video Nasties. I was like, oh my God, why didn't I think of this earlier? No, this is a perfect idea for the podcast. It's a couple things. It's a way for us to dive into a bunch of genre shit that I usually can't convince guests to watch. But also, it's a way for us to kind of go through a bunch of stuff that a lot of other podcasts aren't talking about.
Yeah.
Or, a lot of these movies are problematic in certain ways, but we're going to talk about them, and we're going to get through it, and it's going to be a super fun time.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to rewatching some of these. I'm 100% in. This is the best idea I've heard. I'm so excited for this. I'm really so glad you mentioned this, Murph.
Thanks, dude. I'm really glad to hear you say that. I was really excited and hopeful about the idea, and it was a personal goal of mine that I want to see, and I also want to own all of these films. And the purpose of us watching this isn't to judge the content of the past, and we'll discuss it a bit, but these films are what they are, and we're discussing them in their place in cinema history.
Yes.
And how they relate to what we're doing now, the things that we should and shouldn't do, maybe. But I'm just really stoked to dig into this and to see what else there is to learn about some of the individual subgenres that we're going to cover and everything else. So I'd really love to get some additional discussion going about, the video nasties, the ones that you love, the ones that you don't love, what you wish you could see completely uncut with fresh eyes, that sort of thing. Like
maybe in the future we can even come up with ideas for a movie that would have been classified that way had it been released in the 80s or something,
Oh my God, are you asking me to get nasty, Grutz?
Oh, no, that's the whole point. We're getting nasty on this shit.
Get
but
nasty,
that's all in the future.
Out. We'll see what the future holds, but this is the very beginning of BD Gets Nasty, and I am so thrilled for all of you lascivious schlockheads out there to get gross with us. So for Beautiful Disasters, I have been Murphy.
I'm the Grutz.
Let's get nasty, baby.
Hey guys, Scotty P here with Smash on your left, and we are the Geek Fathers. That's right, bringing all the trials and tribulations of being a geeky parent.
So welcome to our world.
And as always, join us
or cry.
My name is Amy Bogard.
And I'm Mike the Hobbit.
And we are the hosts of Deeply Upsetting, where we use our expertise to answer your most upsetting hypothetical quandaries, such as, what non-winged animal deserves wings?
And what body part deserves a secret mouth?
Which cryptid is the worst roommate?
These questions and more that plague you will be answered on Deeply Upsetting, available anywhere you get your podcasts and at GUIPodcast.com.